Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dial, CPA and tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building transferable or sellable business value, and then for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's transferable and then help you exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. When it comes to which exit route an owner chooses, sale to a third party, sale to insiders, management team, transfer to kids, and ESOP, we're agnostic in the work that we do. We just simply want to help owners pick the route that's going to best attain their goals and put a plan in place to make it all happen. For those who are heading toward a sale to a third party, there is much to be aware of when even fielding and considering offers to buy your business. If it's not something, it is not something you want to run into unprepared, uninformed, because it can absolutely result in you not getting a deal done to your satisfaction, or not getting a deal done at all. And if handled poorly, it could even end up damaging your business in some meaningful and significant ways. So that's our topic today. Lessons learned from fielding acquisition offers. Our guest is Nick Fogle, CEO of Turnkey, and he's learned lessons himself from fielding offers, and he's going to share those with us today. Nick graduated from college in 2008 when there was a financial crisis and no jobs. And Nick would say that he made a bad situation worse by taking out student loans and going to law school. He graduated only to realize he was not going to be able to pay down his debt on an attorney's salary. The debt, by the way, was $250 grand, and the interest was growing by $1,500 a month. So he decided, hey, the best way to eliminate this mountain of debt is going to be to launch my own business, to take all that risk. He wasn't successful finding a tech geek co-founder to help him with the startup idea. So he did what we'd all do, right? He drove a shuttle bus for minimum wage, and he taught himself to code. He then went on to land a job as a lead engineer at a publicly traded software company. And though for 5 years, he spent nights and weekends working on the startup. And in 2020, congratulations, Nick, he paid off the student loan, he left the day job, and then he proceeded to sell his business Wavve for mid-seven-figure sum in 2021. And he took everything he learned from all of that and has turned it into a new business called Turnkey. And so we're excited to have Nick with us today. I think we're going to learn a lot. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. That makes me sound like a crazy person when you go back to the history like that. I'm glad it worked out.
Well, there's a little bit of craziness in all of that. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Hey, Nick, thanks for joining us. We love to have real people, people who have been through the trenches and actually dealt with transactions and building and growing and selling a business. So we really appreciate you coming on board, and congratulations. It sounds like an incredible story. Can you give us more details on exactly what Wavve did, how you got it going, and how you ended up eventually selling it?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So maybe I'll restart the clock a little bit on some of the failed business attempts we had prior to finding Wavve. I think as any new entrepreneur will discover, oftentimes the first idea you have for a business is a really bad one, particularly if it's your first business. So I've been at this publicly traded software company doing the cubicle thing, paying my dues, trying to pay down some debt. Nights and weekends, I was working on side projects. All of these had an entrepreneurial flair to them. It was trying to find something that people would pay to use. And I found a co-founder at that company. We started working on a platform for podcasters. Actually, this was, I'm sure you remember the Serial podcast, 2015 era, podcasting suddenly was on the map. We loved listening to podcasts. We were pretty early to that space. We loved radio. We loved audio as a communication medium. And we realized there was this problem. There was no way to engage with the podcast show or other listeners in a native format, or really any format for that matter. So we had this idea. We were going to create this product. It was called UTalk, which is a bad name. We got trademark suit. We got a cease and desist like almost immediately. So we rebranded as Wavve. And we spent about a year building out this massive platform. It was kind of the field of dreams mentality. It was like, if you build it, they will come kind of mindset, where we had so much development and engineering work went into this. We just thought if we built the thing that we wanted, other people would pay us to use it. And we'd get funding and we'd be on yachts before we knew it. And that didn't pan out. As you can imagine, we built this thing that we thought was really cool. And, we had a couple of like radio shows, ESPN radio, a couple podcasts. Their audiences loved using it, but they weren't willing to pay what we needed them to pay in order to turn that into a successful business. It was just a lot with this platform. But one lesson I've learned in business and entrepreneurship is if you're in a problem space long enough and you listen to the market, you look for problems, eventually you will find a problem that people are willing to pay you to solve. And just before we were going to spin down Wavve and throw in the towel, I kind of took a Hail Mary attempt to solve one final problem. And that problem was that audio did not share well on social media back in 2015, 2016. Not sure if you remember, but back then, audio, it was like you share something to Twitter, you share something to Facebook, and you get this like little audio play bar, which nobody clicks, nobody engages with that. So if you were a podcast or a radio show, how could you create engaging content? So I started to build out this, it was kind of a all-nighter hackathon I did, where we were able to take audio, we're able to automatically convert that into an engaging video that animated according to somebody's voice, and turn that into a beautiful video. A podcast or a radio show could post that to their social media profile, and they would get amazing engagement from that. So it was kind of this pain point we were solving, where the problem was the audio doesn't share well. And it was a fairly simple tool at first that would just turn audio into a video. And suddenly we had people willing to pay us money for that. We weren't even intending to make this like a dedicated product. It was like, well, we have this problem with our community. We want to let everybody out there know all the great conversations and content that's happening on this community. So we built it internally to like solve our own problem. And before we knew it, within a few weeks, podcasters, radio shows, creators were seeing these. They were like, well, how did you create these? And we were getting a lot of inbound traffic. So that was the pivot within Wavve, where we basically sunset this platform. We sold the platform for pennies on the dollar, then took some of those proceeds and really doubled down on this new direction. And that was the business ultimately that we grew and exited in March of 2021. We sold that business, but at its essence, long-winded way of answering your question, Walter, was it was a video creation tool for audio creators, be that podcasters, content creators, influencers, or radio shows.
So then, Nick, okay, as you're building this and you're starting to get momentum, actually getting paying customers, at what stage did you start to get contacted by potential acquirers and folks who might be interested in buying your business?
Pretty early. It surprised us. The first one we got was from Spotify. And this was back when Spotify, I think they acquired a company called Anchor. They acquired Gimlet Media. They were just in acquisition mode. And somebody from their corp dev team reached out. And I thought it was like a phishing scam email at first. But it was actually a real person, and we got on a call with Spotify. It turned out that we were way too small to justify the cost of M&A that would go into that kind of acquisition. We weren't very big at that point. This was about 18 months after we'd made that pivot. But what we realized from that call was like, oh, wow, this is a business that has potential to be sold. And I was still at this point where I had, at this point I was paying down debt aggressively, but I probably had $200,000 in student loan debt still outstanding. And I knew that, okay, maybe this is my ticket to get out of this. Is there's this exit potential on the timeline. So let's be more diligent in how we build it and start thinking through, what would an exit look like?
Yeah, so when Spotify reached out, they clearly they were intrigued by the technology that you guys had, and the solution that you guys had created. What did you learn? Are there one, two, or three things that you learned with that first initial interaction with Spotify that could be helpful to anyone listening?
Yeah, it was a good signal because it was kind of like our brand was on the map enough to get that kind of interest. But when you get an email from somebody who's on a corp dev team, the realization that I had was they do a lot of tire kicking. That is their job, to meet with as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So the level of seriousness, when you compared that to like a broker who is contacting you, which we had later, a broker who's contacting you on behalf of buyers they represent, knowing that this is very preliminary, it's really just a get to know you kind of call. I think it's worth still taking these and fielding them, particularly if it's a big enterprise like Spotify. But the big lesson there was like, all right, don't get your hopes up. It's a giant company. It's meeting with hundreds of other companies right now, so they're probably not going to acquire us, but let's use it as a learning experience.
Yeah, and can you remember back what exactly, or can you remember at least vaguely, what Spotify asked, what kind of information were they looking for that was beyond just what was on your website? And,
Yeah, they were.
and did you learn anything about what and how to share information in that interaction?
Yeah, a little bit. They were really curious about the technology, kind of how we were doing it. We were the first to commercialize this sort of technology, so we were pretty closed off. We didn't have an NDA in place or anything like that. And granted, if Spotify wanted to build this, they could certainly build it by throwing a bunch of engineers at the problem.
Right.
So, the other thing that came up in the conversation pretty quickly was revenue. Like, what is your revenue? And I was always and still am uncomfortable giving specific revenue figures, even if it's an interested acquirer, until there's an NDA in place. And without an NDA, I gave them a range of like, this is roughly where we're at right now. And it was very quick. You could see the reaction that he was like, oh, wow, this company's tiny. Probably doesn't make sense to pursue negotiations further because the cost of the transaction would far exceed the value.
Yeah, and that happened pretty quick, probably.
Yeah, within that first call. I mean, it was kind of a
Yeah.
open and shut deal.
Okay, so then let's move past Spotify and any other acquirers or
There
potential
were quite a
acquirers.
few over the next couple of years. We definitely got inbound, and there's a lot of junk. You get a lot of interest from like cold outbound, and I've noticed it more recently. My new company, we get these all the time, and 90% of them are junk. But back then, let's say the Spotify interest was like 2018 era. End of 2018, early 2019, we had a different sort of offer that came in. And this one was serious. You could tell from the email it was a broker who represented an interested buyer. And they were looking for a platform, sort of like what we'd built, that was growing, that was profitable. We kind of checked all these boxes. We'd been blogging a little bit, kind of building in public with some of the stats that we had as a business. And I think they caught that had caught their attention. And they reached out and we had a great conversation. It seemed like, hey, we should explore further to see what this could be. And we actually got down to pretty close negotiation where we were really having a difficult decision. The business at that time was probably doing only a couple $100,000 in revenue. And it was a offer that, I'd say it was about half lump sum, half earnout. The earnout would have gotten us like a 6x multiple. But we were growing by 200% a year at that point. So for me, it was difficult because I had, most of my net worth was in this business. Now there was a dollar figure that I could associate. And I had all this debt still. And I was like, wow, in one fell swoop, I could close out this debt. I could catch up on retirement. I'd be in a great position, not living paycheck to paycheck. My business partner was in a different financial situation, and he helped me kind of pump the brakes there and look at it from, well, where would we be next year? Like, there are going to be more acquisition offers unless there's, something horrible that happens in the business. So in all likelihood, we'd have double that valuation if we waited a year. So at that stage, it was like, that was kind of a wake-up call for me where there was a dollar value in the business. It helped me to renew my focus and start thinking about it more seriously from an exit planning point of view, where it was like, okay, well, now there's a concrete value on the business. We know that if we hit these different marks, we could double the acquisition offer if we just waited a year. And it was around that time too that I was like, okay, well, I need to quit this day job and invest more time into growing Wavve and preparing it for an acquisition. So that really influenced my day-to-day decision making. And then it was also a conscious decision to say, we're not experts on this. I'm an attorney. I worked at a transactional law practice for a bit. I kind of understand what goes into this, but I have no idea what the market commands and what a business needs to look like to reach a successful valuation multiple. So we engaged that same broker that had represented a buyer before. We waited 6 months, and so there wasn't a conflict of interest. Came back to him and said, hey, can you coach us through this? We'd love to work with you to exit. So this was, again, 6 months after that very concrete offer we had. And we said, hey, this is the exit we want to achieve. Can we get there based on what we're doing? Like if we continue for the next year growing at this rate, hitting these unit economic values? And he kind of chuckled and was like, yeah, that's nice, but there's no way you'll achieve it. We said, why? He said, well, your churn is 15% per month. There's no way that you're going to have that value multiple if your churn is that high. So churn is a metric, really any business that has recurring revenue, you're going to have some kind of churn. So that means people will sign up for a membership or a subscription, and they're agreeing to pay you monthly. So think of Netflix. It's an easy example. You've got a monthly plan, but you may not be using it at some point in the future, and you decide, hey, I don't need this anymore. I'm going to cancel it. So during that month, they have to recognize churned revenue and the churned users. And at Wavve, the problem we had was we were serving podcasters, and podcasting is notoriously difficult to do consistently. There's a phenomenon called pod fade, where people will start a podcast, they want to get all the things, they get Riverside, they get Wavve, they pay for all the things, and then after 3 episodes, like, wow, this is a lot of effort. I'm gonna, pause right now, and I don't need this, or they'll do, there's some seasonality. Well, they'll do a lot of episodes in batches, and then they'll churn because of that. They'll cancel their account, maybe come back later. So that's what we were being hit with. And so about 15% of our customer base in any given month would cancel.
That's the definition of churn.
Yes. So and that's a good anecdote too for Wavve specifically of the problem and why we were churning so much. And that actually led us to the new business we run now, because we realized this isn't a unique problem to Wavve. Every single subscription or membership-driven business with recurring revenue is facing this problem. So yeah, we had a disappointing call with the broker. We said, man, this is a big problem. It's going to be hard to solve. So we spent a fortune on churn consultants. We're like, yeah, we'll just hire 1099s, have them fix the problem for us. And that didn't really move the needle. We saw maybe a small downtick in churn. There were a couple of other solutions on the market at that time that would help recover failed payments, things like that. Those moved the needle a little bit, but we were still at 12 to 13% churn. And we said, if we're serious about selling the business and getting what we believe the business is worth, we've got to figure this out. So we spent about 6 months working internally on understanding, well, why are people churning? And if we understand why people are canceling their accounts, maybe we can offer them something that can help. And it's interesting because this was around the time of COVID that we realized that we need to understand why people are leaving. And just as COVID was really happening and lockdowns were starting, all of these businesses were having a huge churn problem. We were too. People were canceling anything they didn't need because they were worried about budget. So we said, okay, let's have a survey when somebody cancels, and let's see, okay, well, if somebody cites a reason of like, it doesn't fit my budget, maybe offer them a discount due to COVID. Or if they're just, COVID has thrown them for a loop and they need to pause their account for a period of time until they're ready to come back, we'd offer that. So we decided to really focus on this area, and we started to see excellent results because we were understanding, number one, why are people leaving? Number two is there's something we can do to accommodate them to set both the business and this customer up better for a long-term relationship. And over the course of the next year, we got our churn rate from like a 13% range down to 7 or 8%. So when we met with the broker the next fall, it was the fall of 2020, we were suddenly hitting that value multiple that we wanted and felt the business deserved.
So the broker was helpful in probably not a few ways, but one way was to highlight this issue and bring it to your attention because it got you focused on it.
Exactly. I mean, there were a lot of things that we learned from working with the broker. The biggest one, though, was around value multiples and what we could do to have a higher premium when we exit.
Anything else come to mind that you learned from the broker that could be helpful? Again,
Yeah, we got some general like tax planning advice. We were an LLC, unfortunately we weren't a C Corp. The LLC was nice because we were able to get really nice profit distributions out of the business, and the free cash flows were great. I was able to pay down my student loans before the exit just by taking profits from the business. But the LLC wasn't great from an exit point of view because of, like if we've been working on Wavve for about 5 years, we were very close to qualifying, if we'd been a C Corp, qualifying for no capital gains. So there was, capital gains, there were a lot of these various factors that they just kind of cued us in on so that we were aware of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So then is that you tell us what came out?
So the story took another turn, and think back to 2020. And this wasn't clear until after the fact when we were wondering what happened. But during 2020, capital markets were really compressed. Banks were afraid to lend during that first half. Acquirers weren't doing any activity during the first half of 2020. COVID had just thrown everybody off. And I think what happened is by the end of 2020, there were funds out there that had target allocations they needed to make and deals to be done. So in November, we started getting serious inbound offers. And by serious, it was known funds, known portfolio groups that were interested in having conversations about acquiring it. I think we got 5 or 6 during the month of November. And we met with everybody and had some good conversations. And the cool thing was each of those kind of progressed over time as we talked and kind of understood the values that these funds had. And it was on the day before Christmas Eve of 2020, we got 4 offer letters to acquire Wavve, like formal offer letters. So that was really cool to go into Christmas and have these 4 different offers.
That makes for a nice Christmas season. Hey, okay, so you mentioned earlier that with Spotify as an example, that they have a corporate development team, and that's what they do. They kick the tires, and they're real pros, and so they've got a team that's doing all that work. Did you have anyone on your side of the table when it came to fielding these 4 new offers, or was it just you and your?
Just my co-founder and I, yeah. We were still a really small team too. I mean, we had 3 full-time co-owners, and then we had a few contractors. So we didn't have really anybody. We were just, it made for very authentic conversations, and it helped us to vet the potential buyers more closely to make sure, because we built a really good business. A good business is one that you don't want to sell. And we were kind of at that point then where it's like, man, things are really going well with Wavve now. Do we really even want to sell it? So that helped us.
You just mentioned something very important, I think. You were vetting buyers as much as they were vetting you.
Yes.
Right? So you were intentional about that. And
it gave us negotiating power because we didn't, I think most founders are like this. Your startup or your business is your baby, and you've put all this, years of blood, sweat, and tears into it. And you don't want to just sell it to like a private equity fund that's going to chop it up for parts or sunset it within a year if it doesn't hit growth numbers. So we were cautious of that. We didn't want that to happen. So yeah, we were serious in how we looked at, well, who's the best fit for continuing to run Wavve in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so in the conversations, when folks would gather at a table to have conversations, it was you and your partners and then corporate development folks on the other side of the table?
These funds, it was less of like the traditional corp dev teams. It was usually like a partner at a fund or at a portfolio, which is nice because we skipped straight to the partners. I think if it had been like an associate, it was just one of them was an associate initially, and we got to the partners. But that was also an indication of the seriousness and how they were taking, the seriousness with which they were taking the decision to buy.
And so from those interactions, as you look back, what do you feel like, boy, yeah, we do it all, if we did it all over again, we'd do those things again. But we might do this differently, or we might add this, or is there anything?
Yeah, we were really lucky or fortunate due to the timing and the impact of COVID in having funds that were needing to deploy capital during that short window of time. That made it so we didn't need to use the broker. I mean, brokers are extremely valuable. In hindsight, sometimes I do wonder if we could have gotten a bit higher from a broker, even after the commission we would have paid them. But due to that rare point in time, we were able to do it without a broker, just a local law firm that kind of helped us work through the fine points of the deal.
Okay, so you did have an M&A attorney involved.
We did. We had a local guy that, we got a great value out of it. It was a pretty simple and clean cut deal too, once we picked a buyer. I will say though that one of the hard things is understanding, just when you're doing this on your own, is understanding the total potential proceeds from each deal, each offer. If you're new to acquisitions, you're not going to be as aware of like, okay, well, these guys have a lump sum and then there's this earnout. And is the earnout contingency based, or is it more of like a, seller financing where we're basically saying, all right, well, you can pay in installments. And we had one that was like insanely high upside, but they didn't want to pay barely anything in the lump sum. And it was like, that one was a difficult one because we were like, wow, this is a lot of potential value. But we would have no control over their ability to hit those targets because it's new owners that are operating it. So while that one on paper looked good from like a total buyout point of view, we just didn't love that recipe for potential strife or conflict or just not hitting the targets due to that small lump sum initially. And then there are others that were much lower buyout, but it was kind of all up front. And we ended up finding something in the middle. It was an agreement in the middle that was a little bit more installment driven with a large enough lump sum so that it was like, okay, well, if they went, defunct immediately after we get the wire, it would still be a win for us. Knowing that's a low probability event, it's probably not going to happen, but just still, that was kind of the thinking I processed it with. Mm-hmm. And the other thing too was they were the firm we ended up going with. They were a much better fit for where we saw Wavve going in the future.
How were they a better fit?
They had an existing portfolio of companies that were somewhat similar to ours that served creators. They were regional, so I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. They were out of North Carolina. We developed a great rapport. There was just it was a really great fit. Some of this was hunch, but then also there were some data points around current companies they had in their portfolio and how we could see Wavve fitting into the existing portfolio.
Okay, so how does everything that you've experienced translate into what you're doing now, your new company?
Yeah, it was great because I was able to catch up on life after the exit, and having a life-changing sum of money allows you to do a lot of things that I couldn't do previously. One of those is start a new business without working 80 hours a week to try to pay the bills and keep the lights on. So around the time that we were deciding, okay, we're going to exit here pretty soon, what's next? I don't think we would have exited if we didn't have something we wanted to move to next. That's just who we are. I think entrepreneurs tend to be like that, where you're like, okay, well, what's the next thing? It's nice to have a next thing in mind before you close the deal. So we'd realized there was this massive problem that subscription businesses face around churn and canceling customers, and we'd done a really good job solving it. And we'd started to break out what we'd done internally with Wavve into a dedicated platform. And we'd started beta testing with other businesses. They were seeing a lot of success. And it was just really clear, like, okay, well, we have a clear path to the future of, this is the new business we're going to build. And the amazing thing about it was with Wavve, I always felt like I was having to compromise on time and effort and energy I could put into Wavve due to having to work on other jobs just to make ends meet. And suddenly I had a really great bit of runway and capital to make more long-term decisions with Turnkey of the new business. So instead of having to take a very short approach, short-term view of decision making for the business, I was able to think more long-term of like, okay, well, where do we want this business to be in 3 years? And, what are decisions we need to make to get there rather than what do we have to do to just get revenue next month so I can pay my bills?
Yeah. And, okay, so as we start to wrap up, can you summarize, and Walter's going to wrap us up in a couple minutes. He's going to ask you if there's anything you want to promote today. One more question. It kind of is a summary question. If there are 1, 2, or 3 things that you feel like you've learned from fielding acquisition offers that could be helpful to our listeners, good, bad, or ugly, what would those things be?
Well, number one, I would say a lot of the acquisition offers these days aren't authentic. It's not a serious buyer. They're just kicking the tires. So guard your expectations and don't get your hopes up before you start getting into those conversations. The next one would be avoid, if you do get on a call with someone, try to avoid disclosing anything that would give up your leverage prior to getting into that without an NDA in place. And even, before an NDA, like make sure they're serious, ask for references. That's all important. And before you give business metrics, get an NDA in place so that they can't use that against you. And then I think the third one would be, if you're going to sell your business, the first offer you get isn't going to be the best. So and also, like, if it's part of your plan, if you want to exit the business, that's great. But it would be better to have a bidding war or have multiple buyers lined up rather than just fielding one-offs thinking this is going to be the ticket, because odds are, if there's not other parties there that are interested, you're going to settle for something that's lower than the actual value of your business.
Yep. Good advice. Good advice. Listeners have heard those things if they've been listening at some point or another in all the podcasts that we've done. And so thank you so much. This is fantastic. I know that there's just great information in everything that we've talked about here today. Your summary there at the end is very helpful. And so, Walter, you want to go ahead and wrap us up?
Yeah. Nick, thanks again for joining us. This has been really, I think we've enjoyed it, and I'm sure our listeners are going to get a lot out of it. So really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is fun.
Is there anything you'd like to promote today? And can you tell listeners how they can contact you if they're interested in your services?
Sure thing, yeah. Our website is turnkey.co. That's the new business I'm working on. We serve anything from subscription car wash businesses, brick and mortar subscription businesses, to the giant tech companies that you've all probably heard about. So if you have any sort of subscription business, you can find us at turnkey.co, and you can reach out to me directly at nick@turnkey.co, or I'm also on Twitter. Nick Fogle is my Twitter handle. I was early and lucky enough to get my full name there.
Okay, fantastic. And listeners, if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or planning for your eventual exit, you can reach Pat at 301-859-0860, and I'm at 301-951-9090. If you've benefited from today's episode, please consider liking and sharing it on social media. And as always, thanks for listening. Until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Walter Dial and Pat Ennis signing off.